UG channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. Welcome back on your favorite football updates channel. It's a beautiful Friday morning, 11 minutes past the hour of 9 a.m. here in Kampala, Uganda. We've had the false restart. False start to our earlier broadcast that I had to redo it over again because for some reason I had forgotten to have the microphone turned on. And that's why I keep telling you guys to allow me test our audience once we get started, because usually we have this kind of thing. Yo, Evers Edits, how are you doing, my brother? It's been a minute since I last seen you here, but I hope you're doing well. I hope life is being kind to you for the time that you've been away. Yeah, it's been a long time indeed. It's been a long time indeed. But I do pray that you're doing all right. I do pray that you're okay in your respective hustle. I know sometimes life gets in the way of our daily routines that we get dragged either by school, by work, depending on what sort of preoccupies us really. So, but I do pray everything is going on well for you in whatever it is that you're trying to pursue. It's always a pleasure to see you around, and I hope it will stay that way going forward. So guys, once again, allow me have our audience tested, make sure everything now is fine and that we are good to go to avoid another false start like we just had a couple of minutes back for those of you that had tuned to the channel. But anyways, it looks like we're good. It looks like this time around we're good on that side. Then quickly, today we will be discussing, of course, the very latest on that Eberechi Eze move, proposed move to Arsenal. We will be talking about the preview that is between Chelsea versus West Ham today. That game is on today at 10 p.m. I just don't know. Apologies on the internet, please. I just don't know. Apologies on the internet, please. Apologies on the internet, please. I do not know for how long we're going to have to sort of bear the sort of poor bandwidth and then the internet going off in the course of our broadcasts, but we will have to bear. I'm yours, so kindly bear with me and understand that those are some of the challenges or problems that come with living in a third world country. Even internet that you hope should be reliable, that you're well paid for, tends to act up like it has done today or this morning. Anyways, like I said, we'll kick off with an update from the African Nations Championships that do get under, while the other fixtures will come on Saturday, with respective kickoffs. Of course, Kenya will be up against Madagascar, while Tanzania are going to be up against Morocco today at 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. respectively. That's the kickoff time. While tomorrow, Saturday, Uganda versus Senegal at 5 p.m. while Sudan will be up against Algeria. Sudan will be up against Algeria. So that's the case. That's what's going to happen for the Uganda Cranes. A lot of fans are in disarray for missing out on match day tickets because those tickets got sold out in just a couple of hours. A lot of fans have missed out on getting themselves match day tickets. Embo 777 says hi. Hi Embo, why are you joining us from this beautiful morning? A good morning to you everyone that is just joining us. My name is Robert Kesakos and welcome to the Footballtribe UG channel. Somebody poses a question: Isak stays to stay or leave? Well, from the look of things at this stage, it appears that Alexander Isak will stay at Newcastle now, predominantly because Newcastle failed to find the perfect replacement for Alexander Isak in the market. They already wanted to sign a striker before they even entertained the thought of Isak leaving. They've been targeting multiple players, but they've missed out on majority of those, including João Pedro, Hugo Ekitike, Benjamin Sesko. They are now in pursuit of Yohan Wissa from Brentford. It's so far not going well. They had another bid turned out the other day. I think that was on Wednesday. It was a bid of £35 million plus £5 million in expected add-ons for the 28-year-old DRC Congo international. Then they also they are also in pursuit of Nicholas Jackson from Chelsea. No formal bid has been made, but they have interest. in Chelsea's Nicholas Jackson. Bayern Munich are also interested, as well as Aston Villa. They are all interested in signing the 24-year-old Senegalese forward. He's a player that is known too well to Aston Villa manager Unai Emery, because they did work together at Villarreal before he left Chelsea at the end of the 2022-2023 league campaign, and then he joined Chelsea, where he's been for the last 2 seasons. And I think he's sort of fitted in well in the Premier League. He's yet to hit those, eyebrow-raising numbers, but I think he's done much better than most strikers do when they've just been introduced to the Premier League. In any case, his first season was better than that of Alexander Isak, but partly also because of his fitness and availability. He played more games in the Premier League in his debut campaign, as many as 35 games, as compared to Alexander Isak's 22 games played back in 2022-2023, when Alexander Isak had just made the switch from Real Sociedad to Newcastle. Kuyang FC is the one who posed that question, but I hope I've answered your question. However, we can't rule out anything, as the transfer window is one that can be very, very unpredictable. Anything can happen with the transfer window. At present day, we can rule out a move for Alexander Isak, and then by the tail end of the window, or towards the tail end of the window, Newcastle choose to sanction a move because they have a player in protest who obeyed, is under contract. Now, given how he's behaved personally, I think Newcastle should stick it to him and not give him a transfer, because once you hit to a player's demands that to which they take an extent of choosing, to forego some club responsibilities in the form of protesting because they want to move to leave the club, or because they've asked to leave, what does that communicate to the rest of the squad? Because Newcastle could easily find themselves next summer or even in January that maybe Sandro Tonali wants to leave, maybe Joelinton wants to leave, maybe Bruno Guimaraes wants to leave. We know about Manchester City's interest in Tino Livramento. You wouldn't want Tino Livramento to behave in a similar fashion if he were to tell the club that he would want to explore his move away from Newcastle. So to send us a very, very strong message, I think Newcastle shouldn't entertain a sell for Alexander Isak, at least not until next summer. That will be my opinion on that. But thank you so much, Kuyang, for your question. Royal Tampan says Gyokeres flop first match. I mean, I wouldn't call it a flop. He did have the best of performances on the day. Majority of Arsenal players didn't have a good day, even those that have been at the club for a bit of a while. So I won't take too much stick to it. Given the overall nature of the game, Arsenal did play well. They defended well, but going forward, they had so much lacking. They lacked the midfield dominancy that usually gives them the cutting edge in terms of attacking their opponents. They lacked that. So, yeah, while he did not have a good game, I do not think that should be our yardstick for judgment to say that he is going to follow up. But even for the first match itself, I couldn't call it a flop because he made a couple of good runs, and then maybe sometimes the final pass wasn't good. For example, there's a run that he makes, and then instead of for him being played in a direct pass to, it sort of played sideways to the right wing. Then at one moment he attempts to make a cross for actually one time he makes a perfect cross, and then Gabriel Martinelli misses that chance when he attempted a bicycle kick or a volley. Then another was an overplayed pass. So yeah, it is true that he did not have a good debut in terms of his Premier League debut at Manchester United, but I wouldn't define it as a flop because it's too early. It's too early. I would want to give him a couple of at least 2 to 3 months to see how he does settle in. Because again, what is practically going to happen is that we're going to have 3 match days played. That's match day 2 and 3, and then we'll go for the September international break, which will last a fortnight. Then we'll be back and play about 4 match days, and then we will be going into the October international break. Then fast forward, there will be a November international break. Usually they tend to come and thick and fast before we wrap it up for 2025, and then we will have to wait for another international break next year in March. So usually when you have those start stops they do not help pretty much players that are trying to adapt, players that are trying to acclimatize themselves with their new environment, with their new leagues, and Victor Gyokeres is really, really well one of those players in as far as acclimatization is concerned. So I'm not worried about him. Then quickly allow us to move on to Eberechi Eze because he is the gist of the conversation as we speak. A transfer upset for Tottenham fans, one that they did not see coming, one they would have hoped it never gets to come, but unfortunately, it has had to happen. It has had to happen as Arsenal completed the hijack for the 27-year-old attacking midfielder from Crystal Palace. Now, while for some people they do feel that it was a bit of a surprise move as a heart attack would come, it isn't really the case because we are talking about a player that Arsenal scouted for quite some time. They did initiate exploratory talks as early as June, and they've been in the conversations or on the fringes of those conversations for quite a while. And while Tottenham Hotspurs were busy negotiating their move, they remained in contact with the player and his representatives as well as the club. I'm told Tim Lewis, one of the Arsenal executives, is a very good buddy of Steve Parish, so that did help in the move. And because Andrea Butter and Tim Lewis did work on this deal together. Manchester United 15th again. That's Ikana. That's his submission. That's his prediction. Well, personally, I do. Okay, right now they are 15th too on the Premier League table, but that's not where I think they will finish at the end of the season. Given their current squad in the current state, my prediction is that they will finish at least 7th on the Premier League table. And guys, so if you do want to know what my full season predictions for the Premier League are, please go to the chat. Excuse me. Please go to the channel under the video section. You'll be able to see that video about my predictions for the Premier League season and watch it all. Give me your thoughts on that, or your opinions, your views, whether you agree, whether you disagree. Go and leave me a comment there. Bro, can you say one team will win? Bro, can you say one team will win a next Champions League? You mean next Champions League? What team will win the next Champions League? I mean, it's really hard to say. I can only mention favorites. One, the reigning champions, PSG, are favorites. Not that they will win it, because rarely or never in the Premier League era have I seen it that a team wins the trophy for the first time and they are able to defend it or to come back and win it again in quick succession. Because some of the examples I can give you, you remember Chelsea in 2012, they won it, but it took them a couple of years, I think close on to a decade, until they won it again in 2021. Manchester City won it in 2023 and failed to win it in 2024 because it went to Real Madrid. So I do not expect PSG to win it, although I could feature them as favorites. Bayern Munich ought to be in that conversation. I expect Barcelona to be well in that conversation. Real Madrid, given their pedigree, they ought to be in that conversation, but as well as Arsenal, particularly because of their squad. Liverpool should be in that conversation. So if I were to predict what are the quarterfinals for some of the teams that should be in the quarterfinals for the UEFA Champions League this season, my expectation will be that PSG is there, Liverpool is there, Arsenal is there, Bayern Munich is there, Barcelona is there. I'd go maybe Napoli and Real Madrid. Who else would I add? Essentially, those would be my takes, really. Any other would be a surprise, really. But that would be my prediction on that. Yes, you are right. Thank you so much, Embo, for that. So quickly, going back to the Eberechi Eze deal, like I was telling you guys, while many people have thought that it was a bit of a surprise move, it couldn't be more totally farther from the truth, because like I said, he is a player that Arsenal have been having discussions over for the last couple of weeks, and we've come to learn that apparently Declan Rice was constantly giving the manager that's Mikel Arteta at Arsenal updates and glowing recommendations about Eberechi Eze. Apparently, Eberechi Eze was inquiring from his England national team teammates who also play for Arsenal, whether there is a bit interest from Arsenal, whether Mikel Arteta likes him, whether Arsenal could make a move, and things like that. Because we are talking about his childhood club. He was at the Arsenal Academy at the Hell End until the age of 13 when he was let go. So that there's that bit of history, and it's a club that he supported literally all his life, while he was open for a move to Tottenham Hotspurs, because it will be an upgrade from Crystal Palace in itself. Essentially, what he really wanted was looking out for a move to Arsenal. However, if that were to prove not to be plausible in this transfer window, then unfortunately, he would have made the move to Tottenham Hotspurs. Kuyang says Mohamed Salah deserves the PFA award. Yeah, I mean, without a doubt. Posting 28 goals last season plus 18 assists, giving him an overall 46 goal involvement, which was a record-breaking kind of goal involvement. I mean, if you can't reward that with a third accolade of PFA Player of the Year, then I'm not sure anything else would have convinced you otherwise. And by the way, he becomes the first player to win the PFA Player of the Year award for three different occasions. The other people that have won it, I think, on two numerous occasions. I think you could look at Nemanja Vidic, 2007, was it 7, 8, 9, around between that time? Then you have Thierry Henry, you have, I think, Hurricane, one of those players. So yeah, I mean, it was really well deserved for him to win it, in my view. So in regards to Eberechi Eze, Oliver Glasner has already confirmed that unfortunately Eberechi Eze won't be playing for them anymore. He didn't feature last night as Crystal Palace did beat up against Fredrikstad from Norway by 1-0 in their first leg of the UEFA Europa League, the UEFA Conference League qualifiers. Apologies on that. Goodbye, bro. See you later. Thank you so much, Embo, for being with us today. Thank you so much for your valued participation, and I hope you get to join us every single day, 9 a.m. on the respective broadcast, but also in the night at 11 p.m. Every single day. Albeit we did miss out last night due to unavoidable circumstances. So Oliver Glasner was speaking about Eberechi Eze. Last night he did say, "I wish Eberechi Eze all the best. He won't play for us anymore," while commenting about the situation with the player after he missed yesterday's game, in which Jean-Philippe Mateta did score the only goal that guided Crystal Palace to victory. My hope and expectation is that Crystal Palace will get over Fredrikstad and advance to the group stages of the UEFA Conference League. Then Steve Parish to Channel 5 Sport on Eberechi said, "The king is dead. Long live the king. We have to move past it and find other players who can support the team. We will try and use the money and build a bit of a broader and stronger base." So that's the Crystal Palace chairman equally confirming the departure of Eberechi Eze, who is set to undergo his medical today in London ahead of completing that switch from Crystal Palace to Arsenal. I hope, I do wish Boss Royal was here with us to give us the geographical context between Crystal Palace, Tottenham Hotspur, and Arsenal, because I mean it's very interesting. This is the third time that Arsenal are literally snatching a player out of Tottenham's laps. You had to go back in time for Emmanuel Petit when he came from Monaco, and he did have conversations with Tottenham Hotspurs. They paid for his cab as he made the trip to Highbury. I mean, he went on to meet Arsenal, Arsene Wenger in his home, and Arsenal gave him a better offer. It was more than double the wages that Tottenham Hotspurs were offering, and it was, at the end of the day, it was an easy decision for him to decide to join Arsenal over Tottenham Hotspurs. Shakul Ade Bioe Hi, how are you? Allow me just read Shaku. Okay, it's not Shakul, it's Shaku. Hi, Shaku. Apologies on the mispronunciation of your name there. I'm just trying to figure it out. But thank you so much for joining today's broadcast. Kindly like the broadcast. So, Eberechi Eze is set to undergo his medical ahead of signing what would be a 5-year contract. Now, some reports have suggested that it could be a 4-year contract with an option to extend for further year, but that remains to be seen. But I think the player you've invested more than £60 million in is worthy of a 5-year contract, even though he is 27. So by the time he turns 30, possibly he's into the 3rd year of his contract, and then 32 years, not bad, really. He is the kind of investment where you do not expect much of as much as of a future sale, but let's not get ahead of ourselves for now and call it what it is. I think it's a very, very brilliant signing. Of course, the deal is not yet done. It's not yet sealed until you see a player holding that team jersey and doing his media duties. A deal is never done because we've seen one too many. You remember not Danjuma going to Everton? Do you remember William Borges da Silva going to Chelsea? He had completed his medical with Tottenham Hotspurs. And after passing the medical, he ended up at Chelsea. So unfortunately, those things get to happen. So it's not over until it is over. And that's the case with Eberechi Eze. But the expectation is that if Arsenal can complete everything before midday today, then he will get the chance to be part of Arsenal squad for that game against Leeds United. That's tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. East African time when they do host Leeds at the Emirates Stadium in Saturday's late kickoff from the Premier League. So we'll wait and see. But given how I know historically how Arsenal tend to drag things, I wouldn't be surprised if Eberechi Eze signs and maybe we get to see him in the Arsenal stands on the weekend, and then they drag the announcement for as long as it can come, or they could look to do it much quicker, like the way they did that of Victor Gyokeres when he did sign from Sporting CP. So we'll wait and see. But that's the situation. That's the update regarding Eberechi Eze. His move to Arsenal. Shakur says, hi, bro. Thank you so much, Shakur. Then quickly, okay, maybe before we move on, just shortly, let me just checking on something to confirm. Anyways, it's all good. It's all good on that side. I think. And then Douglas Luiz is officially a Nottingham Forest player. The 27-year-old Brazilian holding midfielder has left Juventus, where he didn't have the best of a debut campaign after joining them from Aston Villa. It's a loan deal with an obligation to buy for about 30 million euros for Douglas Luiz. I think that is a very, very, very good signing for Nottingham Forest, especially in as far as their central midfield is concerned. Pedri is joining us. Yes, Pedri, how are you? How is your beautiful morning? Douglas Luiz is that sort of central midfielder that is very, very mobile, loves to play box to box, loves to take responsibility in set pieces, in penalties, and things like that. He is a leader in that sense. Can always give you a 10 out of 10 performance on any given day. Douglas Luiz to first confirmed. Yes, that's been confirmed. He is a new Nottingham Forest player. Nottingham Forest have been really, really busy in the transfer window in the last couple of days. Acquiring Douglas Luiz, James McAtee, Omari Hudson. There's also another player, Kalimuendo, also joining there. So they've been quite busy there. After Nuno Espirito Santo sort of gave a protest message, despite them winning up against Brentford on the opening weekend by 3-1 against Brentford. So yeah, very, very beautiful acquisition. Now, like I said, what he brings to the team is proficiency and efficiency in operating in that midfield. He can play box to box. He likes to be very mobile. He likes to end up in those goal scoring zones in terms of the advanced middle third of the pitch. So yeah, he is one that you really get to have when you get. Then in terms of winning the ball back, again he's good at that. He's good at set piece play. I seem to remember him scoring the direct corner against Arsenal while he was still at Aston Villa. So yeah, they do get themselves a very experienced player that has been well tested in the Premier League, and he was thriving before he left for Juventus, where it did not really work out for him. Rodrigo agent in the UK, that's Collins. Collins Siat says Rodrigo agent in the UK. Yes, I've seen multiple reports suggesting that Rodrigo Goes' agent is in the UK. Apparently, he was at Anfield in when Liverpool were taking on AFC Bournemouth. So now I've seen that being mentioned in certain circles, and apparently there's an expectation that he could be in London this weekend. And some rumors have suggested that he could attend that Arsenal game, that game between Arsenal and Leeds United. I do not know that to be for a fact, but at least those rumors are there. Then apparently he could go and get to watch that game between Manchester City and Tottenham Hotspur again during this very same weekend. But remember, that game is coming on Saturday in the early kickoff. Whether he can make the move he can actually watch that game, and then after make the switch to London, that is between you and I, remains to be seen. But at least those rumors or speculations are really making the rounds presently that he is in the UK to try and see whether he can get a deal for his player. City won't go for him. I mean, I wouldn't say they won't go for him with that sort of level of certainty, because it is the transfer window. Anything can happen. We know for a fact that Tottenham are trying to pursue a deal for Savinho from Manchester City. So if, let's say, Tottenham were able to land the services of Savinho for Manchester City, maybe that could sway Manchester City into going in for Rodrigo Goes or back in the market to find a replacement for him. So that's why I'm not ruling it out. Then you look at that Liverpool side, given that they lost Darwin Núñez, they unfortunately lost Diego Jota, may his soul rest in peace, alongside his brother Andre Silva. And then they've also lost Luis Diaz. And while they managed to bring in Hugo Ekitike and Florian Wirtz as some of the forward players or players in advanced positions, you sort of have that sense in that Liverpool could make another move before the close of this transfer window and sign another forward player. Whether it's going to be Rodrigo Goes, again, that remains to be seen. City already ruled out Savinho transfer. Again, that can be said. I'm not trying to suggest that has not been said or just to go to the contrary. No, what I'm practically saying is that there is a couple of variables that could move in the transfer window that then compels the club to change their stance, into going in to sign a player. For example, you look at a team like Chelsea, who have persistently said that they are happy with the goalkeepers they have, and while they are happy with that, let's not forget that early in the transfer window, they're trying to sign Mike Maignan from AC Milan, the AC Milan captain and French #1 goalkeeper. Now, when it came to rumors for Gigi Donnarumma, they said they were not interested, that they were not in the run for him. Now, that could be true at a certain stage, but it's not to say that it cannot change. So all I'm saying is that if conditions change or the circumstances change for Manchester City, I wouldn't be surprised if they made a move for Rodrigo Goes. I do not know. Different fans have different preferences, but Rodrigo Goes is the kind of player that any team would love to have. Any kind of fan would love to have at their team. Tottenham Hotspur is one of those teams that have been rumored to have interest in Rodrigo Goes. Whether he can actually sign for them or not, that remains to be seen. Or that's another whole different conversation. So let's just not rule out anything, as the transfer window can oftentimes come with its surprises. The other day, I was telling you guys about that. Everything was agreed between AC Milan and Besiktas for the transfer of Emerson Royal, and then suddenly Flamengo came in and took him. So we've seen that play out one too many times. Just the other day, Atlanta thought they had a deal with Fulham for Rodrigo Muniz. the bid was about 35 million pounds. And then internally, they made the decision that Rodrigo Muniz should not be let go, bearing in mind that Leeds was one of those teams that were already also interested in signing him. So they made the decision not to let him go, and they just turned down that 35 million pound bid from Atlanta. So, but again, that's not to suggest that maybe Atlanta do not come back with an improved bid, and then maybe Fulham change their stance. So all I'm trying to suggest is that these situations, yes, a club may say one thing, but do not be surprised if they end up changing their mind about that. Thoughts on rumors of Elliott to Crystal Palace? I mean, with the departure of Eberechi Eze, I mean, you can only understand that Crystal Palace are going to be very, very active in the transfer window, trying to find a suitable replacement. Hi, Shumail, how are you doing? Palace interested in Jakub Kivio. We're going to talk about that in a bit, but thank you for reminding us about that as well. So, Harvey Elliott is a player that is of interest to RB Leipzig. They're really, really interested in his services. In fact, I think it was Florian Plettenberg that was reporting yesterday or a day earlier that RB Leipzig had agreed a deal in principle in terms on personal terms with Harvey Elliott to make the switch. And then during the course of the summer, he was also linked with a potential move to Bayer Leverkusen as a possible replacement for Florian Wirtz. So anything can happen during the course of the transfer window. But yeah, there's serious interest from all sorts of corners in Liverpool's attacking midfielder. So let's just keep our eyes peeled to that situation. I'm trying to find the exact quote from Florian Plettenberg when it came to Florian Wirtz. Sorry, when it came to Harvey Elliott. This was on August the 16th, but this is too far back, you know, when he said Harvey Elliott and RB Leipzig were already in advanced talks on personal terms. Those personal terms have since been agreed. So let's just wait and see. Crystal Palace could express their interest coming in late, and then the player suddenly prefers to stay in the UK, and then Crystal Palace offer that. Remember, they are also in the UEFA Conference League. It's a bit of a test of European football. And he gets to stay within the UK, so let's not rule out anything. But yeah, there's interest to find the perfect replacement for Abel Eze on the side of Crystal Palace. About Jakub Kivio, again, that solely emanates from the fact that McKay could leave, you know, Crystal Palace if a suitable opportunity comes in for him. The reason as to why he himself is reluctant on making any transfer at this stage is because he wants guaranteed playing time, given that it's going to be a World Cup year. And in a World Cup year, you want, to guarantee yourself playing time so that you can earn yourself a call to the national team. And it's only understandable that players get to make that kind of decision. But we also know for a fact that Crystal Palace wouldn't want to lose him on a free next summer, because they know that he has refused to put pen to paper on a new contract. Now, usually, I've seen this before when a player is being sent out on loan. You remember David Villa when he was going out on loan to Arsenal at the start of the 2023-2024 campaign. What he did was he had 1 year left his contract. Then at the time, he signed a 1 year contract extension, which protected Brentford's valuation of the player, and he went out on loan. I think it was for about £3 million as loan fees. And then after his loan spell, he got to sign permanently for £27 million. So that's how Brentford protected their, value of the player. Now, I was thinking to myself that let's assume, and this is an assumption because we are talking about the Crystal Palace captain. If you do love the club for which you're playing, you could say, look here, guys, I do not want to sign a long-term contract, but to sort of protect a bit, or not to lose me for free, so that the club gets to make some bit of money, is I can sign a 1 year contract extension. I play this year with guarantees that I'm going to leave next summer for this amount of fee. So, for example, present day, the valuation of McKay is around 45 to 50 million pounds, which Liverpool, who hold interest in the player, are reluctant to pay, saying it's an overvaluation for a player who's into the final 12 months of his contract. So he could say, I'll sign and you allow me leave for maybe 25 million pounds next summer. That way you won't have lost me for free. You would have gotten in some money. And maybe out of that 25 million pounds, I get 5 million pounds as commission for this commitment, for me signing a 1-year contract extension to sort of protect that bit of value, and you get yourself 20 million quid. So I do not know if it's a doable deal. I do not know if Crystal Palace have entertained those thoughts, but I'm thinking about it from an idealistic sort of perspective, in a way, so that, I mean, for a team like Crystal Palace, to lose your captain, who is only 24 years of age, well within his prime, a very, very good defender, to lose him for free. And we all know that every penny counts for a team like Crystal Palace. I mean, it's a huge blow. It's a huge blow, really. But that's the situation. So, because there's an expectation that Mark Gay could leave the club before the transfer window closes, Crystal Palace are interested in bringing in a defender as a replacement. But also, it could be that because they expect to eventually lose the player, they could look to bring in a player like Jakub Kiwior. Premier League proven, he's been at Arsenal, I think, for the last 2.5 years or so. So he's a very, very reliable figure. Does he have things to improve on? Most definitely, yes. Like any other single player, he's without his criticism. But apologies, guys, on that internet glitch. Again, I don't know, but this week it's been a very, very common occurrence on our broadcast that internet tends to act up. But apologies on that. So, anyways, quickly about Arsenal looking to sell Martinelli for an expensive fee to Saudi. I mean, Arsenal do not want to sell Gabriel Martinelli. That's been well reported. However, if a suitable offer came in and the player is willing to make the move, then I do not think Arsenal would stand in his way. They would simply get the money and look to reinvest it into the squad in one way or the other. But yeah, there's interest in Gabriel Martinelli from Saudi Arabia. There was reported interest for the same player from Bayern Munich, but now that they've signed Luis Diaz, you expect that interest is no longer valid. However, I wouldn't count it out entirely, because the same Bayern Munich were interested in trying to make an approach this week to try and sign Alejandro Garnacho for Manchester United, and he turned them down, waiting to see how to move to Chelsea. So let's not rule out anything. But yeah, those rumors linking Gabriel Martinelli to the Saudi Pro League are not going to go away anytime soon until the transfer window closes. So we'll wait to see whether when the transfer window closes on September 1st, he will be an Arsenal player or he will have moved on. Then quickly, Collins Siat says, although Palace does have the FFP headroom, though Palace does have the FFP headroom. Now, please remember that for clubs like Crystal Palace that do not bring in much revenue at the tail end of the season, in comparison to maybe what Liverpool, Arsenal, Man United, Chelsea are able to bring in, usually when you look at their FFP headroom, it's usually not that big, So I'll take an example in this particular case, that a team like Arsenal or a team like Liverpool, a team like Chelsea are capable of going into the transfer window and signing as many as 7-10 players, and they would still say that they have a lot of headroom within that operation, and yet you do not expect the same thing to happen for Crystal Palace. So what usually these clubs do is that they move on some of their best or most prized talents, and then go for example, you let go of Eberechi Eze for 60 million pounds and go into the market looking for players in the range of about 15 to 20 million pounds, and you get yourselves at least 3 players to replace 1 player. That's how you build a bigger squad with also good quality. Now, while the figures are not definite, it's reported that Crystal Palace acquired Eberechi Eze from Queen's Park Rangers in August 2020 for about 16 to 19 million pounds, thereabout 19.5, and maybe QPR had a future sell on clause, whatever the case could be. So if Crystal Palace can go back maybe in the Championship and maybe pick a player or two for about 15 million pounds a piece, the way Aston Villa went to Middlesbrough and signed Morgan Rogers, it would be a good piece of business, and maybe you get your 25 million or 30 million pounds and then get to spend it on a single player like Harvey Elliott, who is a little more Premier League proven, and he's had the test at that level, and you sort of squad build from there. We know for a fact that Crystal Palace have a narrow squad, but when it comes to their overall PSR headroom, I think they are in the clear, but at the end of the day, it has certain limits within which it has to operate in. Then, for example, look at a team like Manchester United. In February, Sir Jim Ratcliffe was telling the world in an exclusive interview with Gary Neville that they were almost running bankrupt, and yet this same transfer window, they've signed 3 key players quite expensively. Benjamin Sesko coming in from RB Leipzig for no less than for about a total of 85 million euros. Then you have you brought in Brian Mbomo for a total of 71 million pounds. Of course, 65 million pounds is the guaranteed fees of that. You brought in Matas Cunha for 62.5 million pounds, paying his wages close. Now, although that money is not all paid in a lump sum, that it's paid over installments, again, they've been able to act in the transfer window. But also, they are betting on the fact that they're going to let go of some players that will be bringing in some revenue. Marcus Rashford has gone to Barcelona on a season-long loan with an option to buy for 30 million euros. So you expect that at the end of the season, Barcelona activate that, and then you get the 30 million euros. Then they want to move on Alejandro Garnacho, who they value at 50 million pounds. If they are able to get 40 to 50 million pounds out of that deal, then that's also revenue coming in. Then Anthony is a player that they want to move on. Jordan Sancho for about maybe 17, 20 million pounds. They could get something for him on that. He's refused to go to AC Roma, who are really, really interested in him. They had agreed on a deal in principle with Manchester United for his transfer, but the player has turned down AC Roma, hoping for maybe better opportunities. He does not want to go to Turkey. He's made that clear. So then Tyler Malacia is again of interest to AC Roma. If Manchester United can raise maybe 5 to 12 million euros out of that, that's also revenue coming in. So usually when it comes to PSR, at the end of the day, when clubs make certain investments, that's why you see that they end up having to sell a player or two. Arsenal themselves, while they came into the transfer window with a lot of headroom when it comes to PSR rules, they're going to need to make some player sales, like Fabio Vieira, who is of interest to Stuttgart. Jacob Kivio is of interest to FC Porto and Crystal Palace. Albert Sambi Lokonga is expected to leave. Rhys Nelson is of interest to AFC Bournemouth. Not to AFC Bournemouth, to Fulham, where he spent last season on loan. Crystal Palace at some point were equally mentioned to be of interest in Rhys Nelson. We'll have to wait and see on that. So those are some of the players that could end up. Alexander Zichenko could be a player that leaves before the end of the window, although apparently he doesn't want to leave. One, because his family is well settled within London, but two, most of the clubs that are interested in his services are not willing to meet his high wages that he's currently on at a team like Arsenal. And oftentimes, that's why it becomes challenging sometimes for big teams to sell their players to smaller teams, because usually players coming from big teams are on high wages, and when they are going to lesser teams, they are trying to demand for similar wages, which oftentimes those clubs say, no, we can't really afford that. We do not have the financial muscle to be paying you 100 grand a week, or even 70 grand a week. Maybe you can afford 50, and that's a stretch even on our side. And then the player weighs it around and is like, maybe I'd rather stay on my 100 grand a week at Arsenal or at Chelsea, even though I'm not going to get ample playing time, but I get to make that money for 1 year and then I can move. Also, if he sees out the remainder of his contract and he becomes a free agent next summer, he will have a lot of options for which he also gets to get a very significant sign-on fee as a free agent and things like that. So there's a number of factors that could determine certain things within a transfer window or within which clubs and players operate when it comes to the transfer market. Bata literally destroyed Spurs. I mean, yeah, you could call it that. A lot of people have made reference or inference to the case of when Sol Campbell left Tottenham Hotspur and joined Arsenal. They made inference of Emmanuel Petit when he left Monaco and joined Arsenal. His first meeting when he came to assess teams in the UK was with Tottenham Hotspur, and then he went and met Arsene Wenger, and he ended up signing for Arsenal. So yeah, it's a bit of a reminder for that, and it's a big dagger for Tottenham Hotspur, because you're talking about a player in Eberechi Eze who can play as a number 8, who can play as a 10, who can play off the left wing. He plays off his Achilles, his heels are really very good at dribbling in comparison to especially some of the players that you see the two teams, both Arsenal and Tottenham Hotspur, have within those forward positions. When you compare, for example, Eberechi Eze and James Maddison, we know that Eberechi Eze is a better dribbler than James Maddison. Maybe James Maddison is a more effective player, especially when it comes to playing that final pass and even scoring a goal, or even in set piece play. He is better than Eberechi Eze, in my personal opinion. But when it comes to dribbling, taking on players v1, he's a better player. I think he's better than Brennan Johnson. And when you look at again those similar qualities, he's better than Arsenal's Gabriel Martinelli. So you assess him, and that he has a lot to offer. That's if you're going to play him on the left wing. Then he comes in to provide very, very sufficient competition for a player like Martin Odegaard, who has been criticized for the last one season for underperformance or delivery. And then on the side also, on the side of Tottenham Hotspur, you ought to remember that James Maddison suffered that anterior cruciate ligament injury and has undergone a successful surgery and started his recovery. That's going to take about 6 to 7 months, or probably 8. So they really, really needed a replacement in that position. You have Dejan Kulusevski had a knee surgery, and that is out for quite a significant amount of time. They tried to sign Morgan Rogers. Sorry, not Morgan Rogers. They tried to sign Morgan Gibbs-White from Nottingham Forest. We know how that went down. He ended up staying at Nottingham Forest and signed an improved deal until June 2028. So yeah, Tottenham Hotspur were really, really eager to sign Eberechi Eze as a replacement. In fact, most Tottenham fans were really, really hyped about the possibility of signing Eberechi Eze. They were already in almost celebration, some already in actual celebration, waiting for Eberechi Eze to join them. So it's an absolute dagger for both Tottenham as a club, but also more importantly for their fans, especially bearing in mind that they are losing Eberechi Eze to an arch rival like Arsenal. But thanks for that submission as well. Quickly, that was from Shmal. Eberechi Eze, there are Eberechi Eze to Eberechi to Eze, there we land. Okay, my grades fell off harder than Onana. What happened to your grades? What did you do right, or what didn't you do right? Shumal comes back to say, okay, hi, okay, see that. Is that what? Is that an emoji in brackets? Or I didn't catch that one really well. Harry Maguire at Leicester City was goated. Yeah, I mean, he isn't the only player that has made the switch to Manchester United, while he is a very, very decent player, and then suddenly things did not work out really well for them. Then also Spurs realizing there are like Newcastle. I wouldn't say they are like Newcastle, but again, in a transfer window, their wins, their losses, their unfortunate circumstances. So, for example, Tottenham Hotspurs losing out on Eberechi Eze to Arsenal. A lot of people have sort of come out to criticize Daniel Levy as one who slept on the job or who dragged his feet to get this deal over the line, and because he was trying to over-negotiate. In fact, while a fee had been agreed in principle, when it came to the structure of the deal, that had yet to be agreed. Apparently, Spurs had proposed to offer Richarlison to move in the opposite direction and things like that. Yes, you could criticize him for that. But again, at the end of the day, he's just trying to have the best interests of the club. And we know for a fact that Tottenham is one of the best run clubs financially. Financially, they are arguably one of the best, run clubs. So there's that. But also, I find a bit of truthness to it that if Tottenham had acted much quicker, maybe they would have won the rest to sign Eberechi Eze. But also, in the deal that was agreed, apparently, that Crystal Palace would have loved Eberechi Eze to play that game against Fredrikstad before making the switch to Tottenham Hotspur. So maybe there's a number of factors that could have affected that. But yeah, it's their loss. But their loss is Arsenal's gain. On the side of Newcastle, I think they've tried everything. They've just not been successful. In some point, for example, in the case of trying to get Benjamin Sesko from RB Leipzig, they even offered more money than Manchester United were offering, but still couldn't get the green light because the player chose Man United over Newcastle. Now, I think for Newcastle, it's been a humbling reminder overall in this transfer window that maybe they are not as big as they think they are. Now, that's just a statement of fact. It's not me trying to take a dig at Newcastle because in the minds of most of their fans, they think they are within the same brackets. Chelsea, Arsenal, maybe Man United, Liverpool, and things like that. Yet, in essence, in actual sense, it's not the case. I've oftentimes referred to an article that was written in the Telegraph by a reporter, I think, attached to Newcastle, and he was talking about how if Alexander Isak and Anthony Gordon, who were of interest to Arsenal, if they made the switch to Arsenal, that it wouldn't be viewed as an upgrade, that what would convince them or compel them to leave Newcastle and join Arsenal when present day they are at the same level, or that Newcastle is even better. What justification for that is because Newcastle have beaten up against Arsenal a couple of times in the last seasons gone by, including beating up against Arsenal thrice last season, twice in the Carabao Cup and once in the Premier League. And then I looked at that as a respectable opinion, but one that was sort of short-sighted and shallow. I mean, just because if let's say Real Betis go and beat up against Barcelona thrice in the season, it doesn't make them as good as Barcelona. No, it doesn't put them in the same bracket. No, we should be knowing better when making some of these arguments. So, for example, look at a team like Manchester City. In terms of tradition, you would think Newcastle is a bigger team. But when you look at pedigree, in terms of what they've won, Manchester City are now a bigger brand, a bigger team. They're making more money than Newcastle. For anything you may criticize about them, they've built that brand to be bigger. And so just if let's say Newcastle for 2 consecutive seasons finished above Manchester City and they beat them a couple of times, it doesn't stand to say that they are now a bigger team. That wouldn't be the case. Again, for example, you remember under Mauricio Pochettino when Tottenham Hotspur were constantly finishing above Arsenal, when Arsenal are qualifying for Europa League and Tottenham were in the Champions League. At that point in time, Tottenham were a better team than Arsenal, but overall they are not a bigger team than Arsenal. So that's the reality that maybe Newcastle and their fans ought to remember that, yeah, because losing a player that you are interested in, like Dean Howson, losing them to Real Madrid, I mean, no, there should be no fuss about that. Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool were all interested, but they acknowledged you chose Real Madrid. You lose a player like João Pedro to Chelsea, don't take a fuss about that. Chelsea are a bigger team than Newcastle. That's the honest bit. You lose Benjamin Sesko to Manchester United. By all accounts and measures, Manchester United is a better and bigger team than Newcastle. Presently, they may be performing better than Manchester United, but overall, Man United is a bigger team. When you lose Hugo Ekitike to Liverpool, again, they are the reigning champions of the Premier League. The player would be more enticed to join Liverpool than they would be to join Newcastle. So, and that's not to say that Newcastle have not done enough or they've not tried. But you also ought to remember that by the time they went into the transfer window, that was June the 30th, they were parting ways already with Paul Mitchell, their sporting director. I think Darren Eales was equally leaving. So, I mean, what stopped them from making the right appointments before going into the transfer window? That's why, in essence, they've struggled a bit. But they've managed still to land a couple of players. That's Malik Theo, the defender from AC Milan. They brought in Aaron Ramsdale on loan from Southampton. They brought in Anthony Elanga, and they could bring in a striker before the window closes. Ideally, if they are to let go of Alexander Isak, they will need to bring in 2 strikers. But given their struggles in the current transfer window, I mean, they are struggling to land Yohan Wissa, not because the player doesn't want to join them. He would really, really love to join Newcastle, and he's attracted by the possibility of playing UEFA Champions League football next season. But Brentford are making it difficult. They are demanding for £60 million, which I do not think for a single day Yohan Wissa is worth that. I mean, for goodness sake, he's 28 years of age. Let him go for the 40 that they've offered. Maybe, I mean, even that for me, okay, it's not so high, given that he scored 19 goals last campaign. But yeah, those are the struggles of Newcastle in the current transfer window. You look at their considerations for Nicholas Jackson, and Bayern Munich are interested. Aston Villa are interested. Now, if you're Nicholas Jackson, where would you rather go? It should be Bayern Munich as the first priority. Two, what would attract him to go to Aston Villa as opposed to Newcastle would simply be because of the manager, Unai Emery. He worked with him before at Villarreal, so it would simply boil down to that. Then quickly, okay, Spurs dream target is now a youngster. Yeah, I mean, you ought to find alternatives in the transfer window every time things are not really, really happening your way. Collins also asks, what percentage of a likability is Isak deal happening? I mean, that we can debate on it almost all day. But like I said, for now, it doesn't look likely that he will leave. First of all, Newcastle play Liverpool on Monday, so do not expect him to leave before Monday. If he is to leave, it will be after Newcastle played Liverpool. But also, like I said, Newcastle, one, are not inclined to sell because the player still has 3 years left to his current contract. Two, the way he's behaved does not encourage Newcastle to sanction a deal. Like I made my argument earlier on in the podcast that if you're Newcastle and you hit to this kind of player power, what is it not to say that next transfer window, 2 or 3 of your big players also pull the same trick and expecting the same result? You do not want to open that can of worms. Yes, players must have their power. They must have their liberties in a way, but you're under contract. You signed that contract, that long-term contract. If your agent ill-advised you, blame that on him, but do not take it out on the club. Now, we know for a fact that Alexander Isak asked that to leave. He didn't submit in a formal transfer request, but he asked. But just because you ask your club to let you go doesn't mean that they are obligated to, And when you look at that Newcastle statement that was put out, they said the conditions for transfer have not transpired, and they do not foresee a scenario where those conditions are met. Now, if Newcastle is saying we value you at £150 million, if no team has offered that, then they're not going to sell you because no team has met your valuation as a player. So that's the kind of conundrum that Isak is in. For me, my argument has always been, even when they get good strikers, they shouldn't let go of Alexander Isak this season. You're in the UEFA Champions League. Now, somebody made the argument that why would you retain a player that doesn't want to play for you or that doesn't want your club anymore? That's true. I mean, because our feelings about certain things change. That's why divorce is very rampant. Today you love somebody, a couple of years down the road, you do not love them anymore. That's the same relationship with players and clubs. There's no loyalty. It's about the money. It's a job. You have a contract, honor your contract, do the job, and move on. So now, but in this particular case, yes, he may not want to be there, to play there, but he is under contract there, and he ought to respect that contract. Now, whether he feels that, because Alexander Isak talked about some promises being broken. Now, in Newcastle's response, if you see, they carefully said that there was no promise made to him that he would be allowed to leave this summer. All the promises that we have been made aware of are pertaining to do with the fact that he had been promised an improved contract. Now, because Amanda Stevary left the club, that's Newcastle, and her husband, Madad Godosi, something like that, they left the club, and under the stewardship of Darren Hughes and the new sporting director, then at the time who came in July 2024, that's Paul Mitchell. they chose to go to the contrary on that. They said, look, you still have 4 years left to your current contract. You're one of the best players in the club. We're not to offer a new contract at this stage. Maybe we can revisit that conversation in the future. So at that point, he felt betrayed. He felt disappointed that the club were going back on their word, because it's club officials or representatives of the club that had made the earlier promise to award him a new improved contract, to appreciate what his performance at the team had been after 2 years. So now that that did not happen, I mean, yes, you understand promises being, broken, and that it leads to a breakdown in trust, and that the best solution is to, to end the relationship and everybody continues their own way. You're just not going to get it that way. You're just not going to get it that way. Look, just because your kid asks for candy doesn't mean that you must give it to them, or you're entitled to giving it to them. If you think it's not good for you as a parent, or you cannot afford it in that moment in time, then you're not going to do it. So, yeah. But Newcastle have also caused such problems in players like Wissa or even Everton Anthony Gordon. Now, here's the scenario. You see, what Newcastle are doing here, I understand where you're coming from. For example, in the case of Yohan Wissa, Newcastle are simply interested in the player. They made their offer, and the player is willing to join them. Now, again, Newcastle are in the same position that Brentford are in. And what Brentford are basically telling Yohan Wissa is for us to let you go, we must find a replacement in the transfer window before we let you go. 2, our valuation of you must be met. Now, their valuation currently, although has not been communicated directly by the club, is being estimated at around £60 million. I, for one, do not think is worth that. Then the other thing is that apparently when Ivan Toney was leaving for Al Ahly in the Saudi Pro League, he was promised that he would be let go the following summer, which is this summer. That's for Yohan Wissa, for a fee of about £26 million. That was the gentleman's agreement. Now, we know one too well that clubs or club officials are constantly going back on their word when it comes to gentleman's agreements, in honoring them. We've seen that in the case of Victor Gyokeres to Arsenal, and we saw that it ended up with the agents having to forego his significant 10% maybe commission fees to facilitate that deal. Now, in this particular case, and I'm not suggesting that maybe agents should do the same, but basically, Brentford are saying that you've not met the valuation of our player. So, equally, Newcastle are saying, why do you want to leave? Nobody has met the valuation, our valuation of you. So, Liverpool had a bid of £110 million, turned down, rejected right from the onset. They've never come back with a bid. Apparently, they're still waiting for, some form of encouragement. So, maybe if Liverpool came back with £130 million, maybe by now Newcastle would have maybe started softening their stance to say, okay, let's negotiate, but that's still below our own demands of a player. So it's just that. It's just that. Newcastle have an asset that they do not want to sell, but according to their own statement, they say conditions for a transfer have not transpired, meaning they are willing to sanction a sale should certain conditions be met, and those conditions are not met. And those conditions are beyond just the transfer fee, because the transfer fee is one thing, but also Newcastle's ability to find a replacement before they move on Alexander Isak is another. So those could be the conditions that they are referring to in that statement. That's our interpretation of it. So, yeah, so you come in for a player, you're interested in the player wants to join you, then the other club is insisting that you must meet this kind of valuation for you to take them, then it's going to boil down to that, Why put 130 million on the bench? Again, that would be practically to send a message, because you see, here's how I also look at it. Because also, if you're Liverpool, you would understand, you'd really, really appreciate it if a player of Alexander Isak's caliber is almost desperate to join you, that he wants to play for you. You do appreciate that. But also in hindsight, you have to think about it and say, okay, we sign him for 130 million quid, and then we put him on good wages. 2 years down the road, Real Madrid come calling, or Barcelona, or Bayern Munich, and then suddenly he wants to go, and he gives us the same treatment. Are we going to entertain it? You know, maybe he gets to sign a better deal that gives him a bit of leverage or leg room when it comes to those future negotiations if he's to break out from Liverpool. But you wouldn't want that. You know, you wouldn't want that. So Newcastle decided, remember Newcastle have rich owners. And the thing about rich people is that, for example, if they've been offering you charity, and allow me to use the example, although it may not fit the bill in terms of money here, but if you have a rich man, actually, let me give you a prime story, and this is a true life story. In Uganda, there's a fairly rich man, probably could qualify for being called wealthy by measure of Ugandan standards. He had a plantation, a banana plantation, and every time the community, they had a function, or somebody had lost their loved one, he always allowed the community members to go into his garden or his plantation to fell down bananas and use that as food for their respective functions. Now, one day he makes a surprise visit to his farm and finds that people were felling down his bananas for sale. Now, that was people taking advantage of his kindness, in a sense. And so he chose to cut down the entire banana plantation because he was disappointed in the act of the human beings that he was being kind to. So in this particular case, if you're Newcastle and you have the rich owners that they do have in Saudi Pro League, you make a decision like putting Isak on the bench or to the cold to send him to train with the reserves for the next 2 or 3 months, to send the message the rest of the players that while you're under contract here, we're not going to have our hand forced just because you requested to leave, But because, like I said, if Newcastle hit to the player power in this particular case, what is it not to say that in the next transfer window, you have another crop of players doing the same thing? And put yourself in Newcastle's shoes. If you're Liverpool, and let's say next summer, some of your best players, maybe Mo Salah, maybe Fran Vitz, maybe Hugo Ekitike, or those have just come in. Maybe Dominic Soboslai, maybe Alexis McAllister, Ryan Gravenberch, they all sit down and say, we would wish to leave the club. And then you're like, you all want to leave? And then they tell you, no, we're not going to be, training anymore, or we're not going to go with the club on the pre-season tour. We're not going to do ABCD because we want to leave. How would you react, or how would you rather your club act in that kind of situation? So in Newcastle, sort of holding to their guns is in a way sending a message to say, let's not set a bad precedent to say that players can use their power, even though they are under actionable contracts, to sort of force our hands to do things that we do not want to do, really, especially when we feel that certain conditions are being not met. So you do not want to open that kind of worms in that sense. In any case, I wouldn't like it for my club. I wouldn't like it for my club, because once you give players that kind of power, that means that they get to go on these stupid strikes just because they've asked to leave and you're not granting them their wishes. And then they are willing to take maybe a couple of penalties in terms of a missed paycheck, and they get away with it. You do not want to send that kind of message. So that's how I look at it, really. So it's a bit of an ideal situation, because you would have thought that I prefer for a player to leave a club on good terms, really. Because for every good that Alexander Isak is done at Newcastle, if you were to leave today, that's washed down the drain. You have fans who have Alexander Isak tattooed on their bodies. That's how much they love him. That's how much they love the player. Last season, he guided them to their first major trophy in 71 years. You ought to credit that. Now, he's washing it down the drain for simply refusing to train and be part of the group. Request for your move, but continue with the group. Stay professional. That's all I'm saying. Do it the way Luis Diaz did it at Liverpool. You know that Luis Diaz asked to leave. to be allowed to let go. But no single day did he miss training to say, or no single day did he ask that, please do not include me on the squad for the Asian tour because I want to leave the club. No. You've seen Eberechi Eze. For so long, he's been involved in these transfer rumors. Tottenham had a deal agreed in principle, but he continued to train because he remained professional. He knew what we all know, that sometimes, even when a deal has been agreed, a last-minute disagreement, maybe on a payment structure, could have you end up staying at a club. We've seen these things act out. You remember David De Gea's proposed move to Real Madrid? You remember that? Apparently, Manchester United delayed to send the paperwork. That was the excuse. And he ended up staying at Manchester United. Now, just imagine if David De Gea was acting in this array. Wayne Rooney was destined for a move to Manchester City. And I did not know that until not too far ago. But he almost joined Manchester City. But while he made the request to be allowed to leave to join Manchester City, he continued to train. He